You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And, of course, we're your hosts for this show. And in the spirit of continuing with this, I guess, fun type of countdown type shows, we've been doing a lot of them. Unfortunately, last week was a little bit more somber. It was a little celebration. If you guys missed it, of course, it was a week ago today that we found out that Carl Weathers had actually passed a week ago Thursday. And so, obviously, we wanted to do a show that celebrated his life and, of course, the many roles that he had played, not the least of which being Greef Karga on The Mandalorian. And so, we do continue to celebrate his life, but we did do is our top 5 favorite roles. And what was interesting was we both had the exact same ones. They were just in a different order. So that part made it fun because we were able to discuss, well, why do you have this one at 2 when I have it at 4? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This time, I am proud to say.
Yes.
I mean, it's still, obviously it would be better if, like none of them repeat. But we only have one
Right.
out of the 5 that's a duplicate. Other than that, they're all different quotes. And there were even some where I was kind of like, man, maybe I should throw them in. And I'll probably, because, we usually start, of course, with you. So, you'll give your number 5. When I give mine, I'm going to talk a little bit about a different quote that I was going to put in there and why I did. But
I was gonna say, like, what we could do is, because we do have one duplicate, we can now each just pick another quote that would be like our honorable mention.
now, wouldn't that be hilarious if it was it probably isn't the same, but it would be funny if it was. Like our honorable mention was exactly the same.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious.
Well, it's funny because people, the show's called Head to Head, but yet we rarely disagree. We have the same stuff on the countdown. It's kind of like the audience is probably like, come on, guys, work with me here. Give me a little bit of difference, just one. But, look, in the case of Carl Weathers, he had played in like 80 different movies or something. But really, when you stop and think about his iconic roles, they were pretty much the ones that we put out there. I'm sure there's some other role that somebody might latch onto. I don't know. But this time, and this is a good one. And was this another one? I can't remember. Did you come up with this during the week, or was this something that we talked about? Okay. Because I remember there was a couple of times where, like in the case of the top 5 female characters, we just, was like, hey, that would be good when we were talking on the show. So, yeah. Well, all right. So, basically, given the fact that, obviously we're streaming this thing live at 11, and, if anybody is actually on watching us right now, that's amazing, and we thank you immensely, and hope that you actually chat in. Not just talking about the quotes that we have, but maybe slipping in a couple of your other favorites. Like we might actually have a quote from a character that you guys are like, well, you know what, that was good, but I actually think this quote from that character is funnier. Feel free to chat in, of course, comment in, and hey, while you're there, like and subscribe to the channel. Might as well, right? And of course, again, I want to thank everybody that's actually watching this live, because I know on Fridays we stream pretty late. So I guess without further ado, we can get into this. Is there anything else you wanted to say to set up the list or your list or anything? Or
man, I would just say it's so hard, man, because it's like so many great ones that I could
I know
I could have put in, and it's like, I looked at your list, I was like, dang, why didn't I think of that one? I forgot about that. Then there was one that I was like your number 1. I was like, of course, like that's
any surprise. But it's funny? When you bring that up, because here's my problem, and I'm going to tie this in with one of my choices. It was really hard for me to remember a lot of the really great, sometimes hilarious quotes that were in the comics and the novels. There's just like a plethora of them, but it was like, man, like I'm drawing a blank. And you're right. I mean, it's so hard. Look, we could easily do probably a part 2 and a part 3 to this thing. 5 more favorite quotes or something, that kind of thing. Because you're right. It was really hard to nail it down. And it's funny because when I was looking at your list, a lot of those would be my favorites too. But I'm like, But then, it was kind of like, and I wasn't doing it intentionally to choose something different because actually I had my list in mind before I saw yours put together the show. But it's like you said, I mean, not only are there so many great quotes, you have to look at the context of the quote. Sometimes that makes it better or funnier or more poignant or whatever. And then sometimes it comes from a character you wouldn't necessarily expect. You're like, did he just, that kind of thing. So, all right, well, let's get into this because, it's late and we've got a lot of discussion for these. And again, like I said, if you guys are watching live, chat in, comment on the quotes, give us some of your own, whatever you want to talk about. Obviously, for the live show, it's fair game. Anything's cool. And then if you are watching the rebroadcast again, let us know what you think of our quotes and put in your own. Okay, so your number 5. Your number 5 is actually interesting because it doesn't come from a film. It actually comes from a TV series. And obviously it's, Huyang who actually said this during the Ahsoka thing. I forgot about this. And let me just say, before you, explain your choice here, there are so many great quotes from the Disney Plus shows that I think a lot of people are tempted to focus on the films and they forget just how many great quotes. I mean, hey, look, no matter what you think of the actual series itself, lots of good stuff. So this is a scene where, he's like, because you're a hologram. This is great. I forgot about this. So why is this your number 5?
It's not number 5, man, because once again, it's like the Star Wars humor, right? Like that's one of the things Star Wars is very much known for. Everybody knows about the lightsabers and basically the space opera in a sense. But part of that there is comedy, and it's different than Marvel humor, right? And so one of the things that I loved about that, well, as you were talking about the television, the TV series, is that will those same elements be in these shows that we are watching? And it's true that still holds up, that a lot of the Star Wars humor, a lot of those other little nuanced things still hold true. And so to see this is a great scene. It was taken from the Ahsoka series, and Huyang, they're watching why can't I think of her name right now?
Wasn't it Hera?
No, well, Hera made this. They were talking to Hera, but this was after what's her face got attacked and she got stabbed.
Oh, Sabine.
Sabine. Yeah, and so Sabine is basically recovering in the hospital, and so they finally like, okay, look, we have this droid, but if we try to extract some things from it, it could explode. So then Hera's, of course, is just like, okay, well, yeah, I think you guys should do it, And of course, Huyang is concerned because it's like, wait a minute, explode. Like, okay, maybe we should take this outside. Let's not do this in here, perhaps. And they're like, oh, you'll be fine. And of course, Huyang replies, well, because you're a hologram, you can say that because you're not even here. Right. So I love that because that was like a very human response. And that's one thing that I love, like when droids act like humans sometimes, it's kind of, you kind of forget that they're actually a droid because they're so human-like in a lot of their dealings and their responses. So we got a lot of that from 3PO a lot of times. Like, he would kind of make these quips sometimes where it's very human-like to say. And the fact that he's not human, but it's still at the same time very relatable, completely hilarious. And the comedic timing on it was just perfect,
Yeah, it's funny. As much as we bag on the writing of this show, this is one example where the writing was actually pretty flawless, actually. Because, again, it's like you said, Star Wars is known for its comedy. And a lot of times, again, it comes from an unlikely source. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily... I mean, look, Huyang has basically been saying a bunch of funny stuff throughout the thing. And he's probably... if he's not my favorite character, I would say he's the MVP of the show.
Oh yeah.
And, and of course, there's a lot of rich history because a lot of people forget he was actually a Clone Wars character. He was in the Clone Wars series, and it was the same guy that voiced him that's voicing him here. So there is a little bit of continuity there. And I mean, I agree. I mean, I was thinking about the Ahsoka series too. Like, man, Huyang basically had so many great lines in this show. It was one of the bright spots of that show. So, yeah, I mean, who could really disagree with putting him at number 5? Let's see. So David joins us. He says, "Hello, gentlemen. TGIF. It's Star Wars Day. Best quotes ever. I love you, I know," that is a classic. And anything with Dark Side of the Force in it. And then he's basically like, also, Daryl's number 5 has the second best character in that show. Great line, hilarious. So see, David concurs.
Yes.
And that's actually a pretty fun thing, right? Whenever we can get David to actually agree on something.
Agree. Yeah, he's more head to head than
right.
Head against
right.
him.
It's right. It's really more us against our audience sometimes. Exactly. But this one's good. Well, I'll tell you what. David is definitely going to agree with my number 5 because he likes to call him the GOAT, the greatest of all time, and that is when Darth Sidious in the Phantom Menace basically says, wipe them out. All of them. I mean, just the line delivery that he had. And this is one of those things, again, because you have to remember, in the Phantom Menace, we're basically introduced to that pre-accident or whatever Palpatine, right? He's the kindly old senator that has everybody's best interests at heart. This is where there's that ultimate dichotomy and that deception, because in some of the scenes, you have Senator Palpatine at this time being very much almost harmless and concerned about Naboo and, Padme and everything else. But then the script flips and you get a scene like this in the same movie where, now he's got the hood up and he assumes essentially the Darth Sidious form.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just great, man.
Well, I always love this line. This is a great one because, it's so, and that's the thing about Palpatine, like, in ways, Vader kind of, and this is why I always love, when, what was it, Empire, when, I think it was might have been, no, it was Return of the Jedi. It was when Vader says, I hope so for your sake, Commander. The Emperor is not as forgiving
as I am. Yeah, and that was another line that could have been in there too.
Once again, exactly, and that's one of my favorite ones. But the reason why that rings true for this so much is because Palpatine really doesn't he's very much to the point. He's thorough. He's not wasting any time or any movements on anybody. So the fact that he says wipe them out, number one, that's very visceral. He's just wipe them out, all of them. I don't care, the dog, everything's gotta go.
Everything's gotta go.
He's just everything is just so finite with him. He's just so look, I don't want a stitch of remembrance. Even how he wanted the Jedi, the whole Order 66.
Yeah.
He's just about obliterating everything, and all his movements are like that. All the things that Palpatine does, from his Force lightning to the creation of a Death Star that basically wipes out an entire planet. I mean, everything about this guy is just very destructive and very just almost like a completist. Everything has to go. If I don't want it, I don't want it at all. No remnants, nothing.
Well, he's definitely a visionary.
You got to respect the guy for that.
Well, and not only that, but again, it's specifically, I mean, this is throughout the prequels, this is pretty much true, but you have to really give it to him in this film, because in this one, there's just really that, good side, bad side. It's just a real defined thing. You have the kindly Senator Palpatine and just the vicious, evil Darth Sidious. Now, what I wanted to put, because it was really between this and something else, but I can't remember. I couldn't remember the exact line, but it was actually in the Revenge of the Sith novel, not the film, because a lot of the stuff didn't actually make the film. That's why I will never read the book before seeing the movie ever again. I've done that a couple of times and been burned every time. Revenge of the Sith was the latest one, because for those of you who didn't read the novel, number one, I would highly suggest it. Really, I would suggest that with all of them, because in the case of all the prequels, I mean, literally in every single book, The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, they're way better than the movies were. However, the whole beginning scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan are rescuing Palpatine was really extended in the book. Like, super extended. And there was one line, and I can't remember the exact quote, which is why I went with Wipe Them Out, all of them, where they're basically, of course, Anakin, and this was similar to the movie, where they're just getting thwarted at every turn, like every time, and Palpatine ends up saying something to the effect like, is this kind of how all your missions go? Because it was, I wish I can remember the exact quote, but it was so funny, and it was just one of those things that, yes, this is what you would say, and it's even funnier coming from the fact that this is like the Sith Lord, and he's just going, wow, you guys are, it's really how it always
thing is. What makes that even more hilarious is to see that, like, you don't expect Palpatine to have humor.
That's it. That is why I wanted that to be my number 5. See, because my actual number 5 here makes sense within the context of Palpatine, and I mean, pretty much everything that I'd said on the setup, that all remains true. But that's why I really wanted it to be that line, and I try my best. Of course, I got rid of the book a long time ago, and this is before I was reading them electronically, so I don't have them stored in any kind of a library. I searched online for the line. I mean, if anybody actually knows the line, it's a long shot, but either chat in or, put it in the comment section or something. But it's exactly for that reason. Like you said, you don't expect Palpatine to be funny. And it was a completely comedic and also, by the way, very true line. And it's funny because Palpatine's kind of witnessing these guys, and he's just thinking, like, really, guys? I think the line was delivered when those pods or whatever shut on them and they were all trapped. I think that was when he uttered the line. And man, it was so funny. It was so funny. And that's why I wish that could have been my number 5. And that goes on to say there's so many really amazing quotes in all the novels. But the problem is with a lot of them, I mean, occasionally I'll remember a line or two, but for the most part, it's broad strokes. Like, I know the story, I know a lot of the details of the characters, but it's, a lot of times, you're not remembering lines. It's not like a film. All right. So now we go to your number 4. And your number 4. I'm like milking this for all it's worth. So your number 4, of course, is the infamous Yoda line from The Empire Strikes Back. That is why you fail. And obviously, it's really hard to do one of these without putting a Yoda quote in there somewhere. So I'm glad it's on your list.
Yeah, Yoda being one of my favorite characters, in any genre of movies, quite frankly. I just think he was supremely well done. And, he definitely, in these moments that Yoda had with Luke, he's really trying to, show Luke the true power of the Force and what it can really do and what it takes for that to happen. And you really just have to, he's telling him about, you can't judge things by the way it looks. You have to really embrace the Force as an ally. You have to feel it. You have to trust it. All these different things. And so Luke, finally gets to witness Yoda, this 2 foot tall, being, and he's like 900 years old, basically, and he has this huge X-wing that sunk in a swamp, and Yoda just pretty much effortlessly picks it up. Not only does he rise it out of the swamp, but he then like floats it across the swamp and perfectly lands it without breaking a sweat. He wasn't tired afterwards, anything, and he just kind of just stood there. And Luke is standing there in amazement, and he's like, touching the X-wing because he's still like, and he's utters the line like, I don't believe this. And Yoda just like, that is why you failed. It's like, because you won't believe this. And that was just such like a perfect way. That's a teacher, grandfather, mentor type of thing to say to a student, a pupil of yours. Like, I've been trying to tell you this, but you won't believe me until I show it to you. And so now that I've shown you what's possible, maybe now you will actually listen to me instead of failing. And so I think that was like the turning point for Luke. Was like, okay, this thing is really, really real now. So I just loved it. And that kind of gave me that a little bit of a chill, like when I watched it, but in a good way though.
Well, yeah, because it was the way he delivered it. It was almost like a like a sigh. But what's really funny about it too is I think that's also the first time that Luke actually takes Yoda seriously, because it's almost like what I would call sometimes what some players on sports teams will get this like he's the coach mentality. It's almost like, or some teachers, it's like, okay, yeah, you might know about this, but you've never actually really done this, or maybe you have, but it's been like decades or something you don't understand, on and on it goes. This is where Yoda gets out of academia and actually gets into the game, so to speak, because you have this with teachers too. A lot of times people won't listen to a teacher because they're like, well, if you were so good, why are you here? That kind of thing. And look, that's why you have those who can't teach. Now, teaching is a separate skill, of course, but there is a kernel of truth to that. There really is.
True.
I mean, not with everybody, obviously, because there's somebody that actually liked the teaching aspect more, and they have that desire to pass on the knowledge and, whatever the field is. But usually what led them there was they just didn't really cut it in the actual industry, whatever it might be. But this is where I think that Luke was probably approaching when he was talking to Yoda for a while. It's like, okay, well, this guy maybe was once a great warrior or whatever, and he knows some stuff, but he doesn't understand what I'm going through. And then he sees like, oh, crap, this guy can do stuff with the Force I've never even seen. Because remember, up until then, he's seen a little bit from Obi-Wan, but not anything like that. And neither have we as the audience. So we're put in the Luke mindset, like, holy crap.
True. Well, and that's why I loved it, because the first time we see him even really able to do anything really with the Force was like when he pulled the lightsaber out of the snowbank, basically, that was lodged in, in that little snowbank.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, the lightsaber was what, like a couple of ounces or maybe a pound. But then like the next thing we see, look, okay, he's moving rocks, and he's like, look, moving rocks is one thing, and he even moved R2 and around a little bit. Like, okay, that's one thing. This is something completely different. Like, you asked me to move an entire ship, that's crazy, and we're like, we're right along with Luke, like, yeah, that's crazy. And then Yoda, here he comes, just
exactly
lifts the whole thing up and moves it across, and we're just like, oh, well, all right then. I guess you can.
Well, a lot of it comes down to the fact that we had Obi-Wan's explanation of the Force in episode 4, where he's like, it goes through all living things, it, binds us, I mean, we had this somewhat esoteric explanation of it, and we had a few demonstrations of it, but nothing like that. That was the first time that it's like, oh, that's a thing. Now, little did we know that, in like 10 years or something in the novels, they'd be like pulling down planets and, waving Star Destroyers off with the flick of a hand or something. But at this point in the franchise, the audience is very definitely put into the same situation as Luke. We're witnessing this through Luke's eyes, basically, and we're seeing. Because, look, the bottom line is, you know that Yoda probably wanted to just beat him senselessly with a cane, because he had already been through this with Anakin. We all saw how that went. Of course, we didn't yet, but, he did. And now his kid's exhibiting the same whole thing. He's supposed to be the hope of the galaxy or whatever, and it's just like he's just not getting it. And if anything, I think that what was on display more than even lifting X-wings and doing all this stuff was patience. I mean, you want to talk about patience of a Jedi? There you go, right there. It's like, look, you're not going to need your weapons. What does the kid do? He goes in there with his weapons. It's like, really, dude? Like, have you been here before? I live here. If I tell you you're not going to need your weapons, you're not going to need your weapons.
Right. Yeah. that's a valid.
I mean, I'm almost getting as riled up as Yoda now. And that's the thing. He was very, that is why you fail. I'd be like, see, that's why you fail.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly.
It's like, see, that's the kind of attitude. Exactly. I'd be like, look, that is the kind of crap that you keep doing. See, this is your problem. That's why. That's why
right.
Again.
You sought me out. Remember? Like,
yeah. Right. It's like, really, dude. This is what. Okay, but so yes, and look, we know that there are a million different moments that we could have chosen with Yoda too. I mean, like we both said, it was really difficult to narrow this down to 5, but we did it. So that was your number 4. My number 4 goes in a little bit of a different direction. Still a Jedi, but a little bit different. This one comes from Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, there's a lot of Qui-Gon Jinn comments, but this one, you talk about the whole comedy thing, right? And this is before, when they meet Jar Jar, and it's kind of like, he's like, well, I speak or whatever. And then that's when, excuse me, Qui-Gon goes, the ability to speak does not make you intelligent. What a life lesson that is.
Man, oh my gosh. Yes, we know so many people who shouldn't speak because
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I definitely agree with you on this one. This was a good one.
And this is one of those overlooked ones too. There's a lot of the ones that always look, bottom line, a lot of the quotes that we all quote day and night that are familiar, that even the most casual of fans knows, I'm 1,000% on board with those too. But when I was thinking back to what some of my favorite quotes were, because with Star Wars, it's kind of like you just quote it. You don't really stop and think like, oh, it's one of my... There's a couple. There are a couple that I go to a lot, I guess. But I was trying to think of, like, what are the ones that really resonated with me or that I really thought were funny or that... And that was the thing. And this is one that definitely came to mind. Because, again, being that a lot of us were not that crazy about Jar Jar as a character, and we saw him progressively, I won't say ruining the movie really, but diminishing our enjoyment of the movie as the film went on, I think we're all in Qui-Gon's shoes. Because, or maybe even Obi-Wan. Because we're reacting to Jar Jar the same way they are. And I think that that's just fantastic. And basically when he says that line, it's also something that really tells you a lot about Obi-Wan. Or not Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon. That Qui-Gon, he has that somewhat aloof, loose, cool... He's a master, but he's not so uptight. And this shows that. Definitely.
Yeah, I love the line just because, it's like, it's almost like sarcastic wisdom in a way, Like, that's
exactly.
Not the best way I can explain it.
Oh, that's dead on. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Like sarcastic wisdom. It's like, I speak. And he's like, well, the ability to speak does not make one intelligent. He's just like, and Jar Jar really didn't even know how to answer that. Like, what are you talking about?
Kind of proves his point, honestly.
Exactly.
And you could tell Obi-Wan was never like nuts about him either. I mean,
oh yeah, he was definitely a nuisance to Obi-Wan.
Well, another line, I'll tell you this too, because this is related. Another line that I could have chosen, I think it was after he picked up, because they already picked up Jar Jar, then they pick up Anakin, and and Obi-Wan says something like, "What, another stray?" or something like that.
Man, yes, that was hilarious.
I thought
Look,
about
we keep picking up all these
yeah, yeah.
keep
I
picking up
thought
these
about that
random
one.
life forms along the way. It's like, look, man, look, we're not trying to be about that. We got another job to do.
When he said that, I'm like, all right, man. My respect for Obi-Wan just went up tremendously because that was a really funny line. And it was between that one and this one. It was between that one and this one. All right, so now we're going to go to your number 3. Your number 3, of course, Han Solo. Much like with Yoda, really no list would be complete without Han Solo, too. He's got a ton of really great lines, and that was one of the
Oh,
reasons
absolutely.
why I was like, oh, man, I don't know. But look, this is great for a number of reasons when he says, that's not how the Force works. I mean, take it away. This one's yours.
Yeah, I think that this was hilarious just because, here we have Han Solo. It's like 30 years later, and a little bit, probably even a little bit longer if you're really talking about from A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when we first are introduced to him, and he completely doesn't believe in the Force. Like, there's no some all powerful thing that's guiding my life. He's like, look, I do what I want to do. He's like, oh yeah, all this hokey religion crap you got going on. And then here you go. After this, now that he's had time with Luke, he said he's confronted Vader and witnessed the Force, literally firsthand.
Force hand.
uh, Force. Well, it was a Force hand
It
technically,
was. It
but
was a Force hand, and it forced his hand.
indeed. But um, and then of course he's married to a Force user, and then he had a Force user for a kid. So it's just like for him to now turn around and say that's not how the Force works. He can't even do it, but he knows that much. That was just hilarious to me because once again, you're taking a guy who was a complete non-believer, and now he's completely sold out. And yeah, when when he talked about it earlier, like, yeah, it's all true. The Force, the light side, the dark side, all of it, you know, it's all true. And so now to hear him say, like, yeah, that's not how the Force works.
Yeah.
Like, well, one, how do you know? Because you can't do it, but because he's around all these Force users that's in this life, and he's had an up close look at what you can really do with this thing. And so when Finn, you know, clumsily makes this statement like, well, we just use the Force. Honestly, like, what you just can't just pull it out
And
of thin
that's
air,
it.
dude.
And
No.
that's the thing. And Han would know that. And that's what was so funny
Yeah.
about it. Not to mention the fact that, like you said, there's just something about it was no different than when Han had the lightsaber cutting open the Tauntaun or whatever. It just like, whoa,
Mhm.
Han with a lightsaber. This is just, mind blowing. I mean, he was just using it to cut the Tauntaun, but just somehow, just to see him ignite the lightsaber and use it to some capacity. I mean, it was just, there's just something about that. So, like you said, it was because of the character arc. It's the fact that he started out thinking it was just some myth or something. And then you flash forward to 30, 32, 33 years or whatever, The Force Awakens, and it's like, yep, it's all true, all of it. And then, of course, in The Last Jedi, he's talking about Snoke, and he's talking about Vader, and it's just, there's just something about it. Maybe it's because of the character arc, I don't know. But there's just something cool about Han Solo talking about it. And it's really funny because once Han got dialed into the Force, that's the kind of thing he would say about it. Like, that's not how it works. What are you talking about? And I think that that's so amazing. And that is definitely, and that was another funny line. There's a lot of funny. The Force Awakens, honestly, that wasn't just the Han Solo movie, but that had the greatest lines and just the greatest action. I mean, I hate this. It's too bad that it wasn't the same, I guess, and because he was a little bit more of a supporting character in the original trilogy, which is, that's fine. That's probably what was appropriate. But man, just to have him trying the bowcaster after a long time, and like, wow, I like this thing. And
I
that's
know,
another one.
right?
After all these years, he'd been with Chewie for probably 40 years or something since Solo, a Star Wars story, when he met him, right? And that's the first
Right.
time he finally got to use Chewie's bowcaster. It was just great. All right. So my number 3, of course, kind of ties into our show last week, actually, when we were remembering
Yeah.
Carl Weathers, and a lot of the roles. And, I'll tell you guys, you know what? Because this would be a good time to put this in there. Let me just do this really, really quick. Hopefully, I don't know why, but me checking YouTube sometimes actually affects our stream in a very negative way. But we had the results of the poll because, again, we did take a poll. So as far as the Obi-Wan series goes, because that was this past Monday show, 59% of you want more Obi-Wan, 41% no, the first one wasn't that great. So that's actually, because remember, it started out where it was more no. Now it's more yes. So I found that interesting. But the thing that I want to point out was that we put up a poll about your favorite Carl Weathers roles. Apollo Creed was at 26%. Chubbs, poor Chubbs, still at 0. Dylan, of course, Predator, that was 10%. Greef Karga, though, was 65%. And so that just shows that there's a lot of love for that character, and it's really great because that was really the last great character he played. And no surprise, Greef Karga makes my list at number 3. And number 3 was when he was like, come on, baby, do the magic hand thing. That was, and he's doing this. And then, of course, Grogu kind of starts doing this. I mean, and again, it's almost the same kind of thing, right? Like, he didn't really think anything of the Force. He still doesn't really know what it is, but he knows it can get him out of a sticky situation because he's seen just
hand.
enough. Right. So it's like, come on, baby, do the magic.
That's right up there. Like, it's all in the hips. I mean,
really. It is. It's a great line. Once again, perfectly executed and delivered by Carl Weathers. I mean, it was just, and it's also, this is something that I really love in Star Wars films when they do this, is that they actually have a character react very similar to what we would say. It's almost like, what would you actually say if you were in this situation?
Yeah, exactly. And I love that.
And I love that, where it's not so scripty, if that's a word. It's not so written. I mean, it gets so bad that, and we even talked about it, when you finally had that Ezra Sabine reuniting toward the end of the Ahsoka series. I mean, and they're riding on that beast or whatever. It really sounded like they were just reading off of cue cards at each other. I mean, that's basically where that went. And it's just so nice, not only to see more organic dialogue, which you tend to get in The Mandalorian, but having a character like this reacting the same way we would if we were in that situation.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think the fact that he, and like, there's times where, like in the sequel era, more or less, and I kind of consider this part of the sequel era, even though it's not in the sequel trilogy. But when Luke Skywalker says laser sword or something like that, like, we all know what it to be. I know, but it's funny when you have someone like Greef Karga. It's like, okay, I don't know what to call this thing. Like,
right.
First of all, I don't know what Grogu is. I don't even know what what species are you. It's a baby, and then it, every time it holds up his hand and does this little, things happen. And so I don't know what to call this thing, so I'm just call it magic because that's what I interpret it as. And so the fact that he said, "Yeah, do the whole magic hand thing," I mean, I just think that was just. But then he's still trying to talk to him like a baby.
I know, that's what made it so good.
So that's what made it so funny. It's just because it's like, okay, baby, do the magic hand.
Do the magic hand thing. I mean, it was so funny. And what made it funnier I mean, it would have been funny.
Highly stressful situation.
Exactly. It's out in the middle of this battlefield. They're getting pummeled. And, he's like, all right, let's do this. And then he turns around. Okay, come on, baby. Do the magic hand thing. I mean, it just made it that.
About it just makes me crack up.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, it just made it that much funnier because of the situation. So I absolutely had to give this as a number 3 because it definitely ranked up there. And again, I know a lot of people might be like, wait a second. I mean, first of all, let me remind you that we each do have 2 more choices. So there's like 4 more quotes. Well, 3 more because one of them's duplicated. I'm not going to tell you which one. Although you're going to find out next, actually. Or no, you're not. Close. But it's one of those things that, there's so many great quotes and so many cool things. But it's these kind of quotes, I think, that really don't get their due. They actually don't get a fair share. I mean, everybody's so used to a lot of the lines that everybody knows. Even the most casual fan knows them. And don't get me wrong, part of the reason why that's the case is because they're iconic lines. I get that. But there's so many other lines that just went under the radar that it's nice to give a little bit of attention to them because they're either funny or maybe they're deep, kind of like the "that is why you fail." I mean, and that's kind of an iconic line. But yeah. All right. So now, of course, we had the Emperor. Now we're going to go to Vader. And this is another one. And this is another somewhat comedic one. Yes. Now we're back on the dark side. And this is another thing, too, because Vader's another one. Like you said about Palpatine. You don't really expect him to be funny, but a lot of times he is. He has this.
And it's like unintentionally, though. That's the thing. He's not trying to be funny.
No, and pardon the pun, but he's got a very dark sense of humor. And of course, your number 2 is when Admiral Ozzel came out. Like he's as clumsy as he is stupid. I mean, and what's funny is that line could actually blow by you, but when you really stop and think about Vader saying this, it's actually hilarious.
Man, so funny. And this. Well, first of all, when Captain Nita comes to to inform him of this, it's like, well, Lord Vader, we've come out. He said, Admiral Ozzel has brought us out too close to the system. Well, he felt that, and then he just cut him off. Like that was the first part. The cutoff was just
right.
I don't even want to hear it. He's just as clumsy as he is stupid. Like it's almost like he's saying it to himself, but he said it out loud. And that's what made it, to me, that's what made it funny, because that was supposed to be an internal conversation Vader was having with himself, but he actually said it out loud.
And I partially wonder, though, if that was triggered by the reasoning that Nita was going to give him, because he's like, well, he felt that surprise was, or whatever.
Yeah.
And, that's when Vader's like, no, he's as clumsy as he is stupid. It's like, no, don't even come to me with that kind of surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because he knows, apparently Ozzel's track record hasn't been the greatest anyway. Because initially on the onset of it, he was trying to convince Vader that wasn't the rebel base. He was trying to tell him, he's like, well,
that's right.
Well, sir, it could be anything. It could be smugglers. It could be anybody. Like, he's like, no, that's the system. Like, I'm telling you, I know this. He's like, but he's like, okay, whatever. So, I mean, that's just what made it so hilarious to me. And so then, of course, when he turns around, he's had enough. So then he just starts choking Ozzel.
Yeah, and that was the one. Wasn't that the first time that we saw that Vader could do this as like a hologram? Like he doesn't even have to be on the same ship. He just like spins around. Ah, Lord Vader, we've come, and all of a sudden he starts getting choked out. That was great.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, whoa, I didn't know you could do it that way. Sweet.
No, and I mean the funny thing about it too is that you have a good point too, because that's right. I mean, Ozzel was even trying to convince him that wasn't even the base.
Yeah,
but it's just really funny.
Hundreds of probes. It could be anything.
Yeah, it could be exactly. That's almost related to the same thing in A New Hope when no life forms are aboard. It's probably just a malfunction or something. It's like no. Mm-hmm. That's not what it is. And that's great. This actually reminds me, it's almost like the Kylo Ren undercover boss thing on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yeah.
And that's still, I watched that not too long ago because I don't know why, but I went on a YouTube rabbit hole. So I went on this YouTube rabbit hole probably, I don't know, it might be a month ago now, maybe a month and a half, somewhere in there. Wasn't that long ago, though. It was probably right after, because he had just, so it might have been during Christmas or whatever, he had just hosted Saturday Night Live again, like a few months ago. And man, it was just another round of incredible skits because Adam Driver really takes it seriously. He studies his lines. You can tell he's not reading cue cards. He's actually embodying these characters. And so I went down this because a lot of times they'll post on YouTube like the actual skits. They'll just break up all the skits and weekend updates and all that stuff and just put them out as individual clips. And man, every one of them, he just knocked it out of the park. And it's the same thing with all of them. I went down the whole rabbit hole just rewatching a lot of his stuff. When he was that old dude speaking to the class or whatever.
Oh yeah, Jericho or Jumbo.
Yes, exactly
like that.
Yeah, right, like an Archibald, something or other.
Yeah,
it was something like that. Yeah, I mean that was just one of the funniest. I mean, every time I watch it, I'm almost in tears talking about it. But the stroke of genius really came when they decided to make Kylo Ren be on an episode of Undercover Boss. And they had two of them. He was Matt, the radar technician. Which, of course, technically became canon. Because he was featured, Matt, the radar technician, was actually in a comic book that was canonized. And he was also a playable character in Battlefront 2, I believe. And, I mean, it was dead on. It was incredible. But, yeah, that's the kind of thing that's just amazing. And that's sort of what Vader reminded me of during that scene, is that it's almost like, he's just this boss that has all these incompetent workers. And it's almost like this meme. I don't know if you've seen this one or not. But basically they show the scene where he's choking out Mahdi. And it basically was like, he had a disagreement with a coworker at a staff meeting, and so he choked him or something like that. It was almost like relating it like an office type of a thing or something. And those are the very human elements of it. And I think it also brings out the humanity in Vader too, because he's clearly frustrated. Like, guys. Or what it really brings to mind is that Robot Chicken episode where it's kind of like, all right, he thinks he can choke people. We don't want him to find out he can't, because if he can't, then he's going to use his lightsaber, which will kill us. So we pretend to die. You put on this mustache, and you go back out as somebody else. It was a great skit. All right, so now we get to my number 2. My number 2 is the lone duplicate on this list, and of course it is, that's not how the Force works. Because once again, as anybody knows that watches this show with any regularity, Han Solo is probably my favorite character. It floats because Vader, I mean, there's a lot. Sure, Palpatine's up there. Those are just the classic guys. I mean, I love Dooku, it's like there's a lot. But Han Solo, if I had to choose one favorite character, he would probably be the one. And for all the reasons that we mentioned for your choice, now I bumped it up a little bit higher. I thought that it was really one of those lines that basically, like I said, for all the reasons that we talked about, it's somebody who at one point didn't believe in the Force and now sees it, and some of the comedy that comes from that, and him, some kid is ignorantly saying, well, we'll just use the Force. And keep in mind, they had infiltrated Starkiller Base. And now they're kind of screwed because Han and Chewie thought that Finn had a plan. And his grandiose plan was, well, what? We'll just use the Force. So that is what led Han to say this. And again, there was a lot of great lines in this whole thing. What was the one, too, where he turned around and go, oh, you're cold?
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. Like, that was another good one. It's like, Oh, you're cold? Like, one, you kind of almost have to wonder, like, okay, like, dude, how are you cold? You're like covered in fur.
That's it.
Like,
That's it.
you know,
Exactly.
like, look, dude, like, I want to hear I'm freezing because, I got a parka on and that's about it. I don't even have a hat. Like, you're covered in fur and fat. So you're more insulated than all of us out here.
But if you think about it too, The Force Awakens, I mean, I get it, it's part of the sequel trilogy. That alone is going to have people more or less turning against it. But when you really stop and think about it, this is really one of the deepest character explorations of Han Solo. I mean, sure, some
Mhm.
people can point to Empire. I wouldn't necessarily totally disagree with that. Obviously, that's probably the best Star Wars film there is. But this actually, I think, in some ways goes a little bit deeper because you see more of Han because he's featured more. And you see him delivering these funny lines, and he's sort of snarky through the whole thing, but he's also filled with emotional depth when he has to, like in his dealings with Leia,
Mhm.
or him wistfully recounting what's happening to his son, or when he solemnly talks about Luke and how the Force is real and all that other stuff. I mean, there's just so much there for this character.
Yeah.
So if anybody that loves Han Solo probably will have a slightly higher opinion of The Force Awakens than maybe the average person, myself
No,
included.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, so I mean, that was just, I had to put that at number 2 for not just all the reasons that we mentioned when it was on your list, but also because of the fact that I just thought that this is really one of those, you could almost go between this one and the whole "I love you, I know" thing, because
Mhm.
that really encapsulates the Han Solo character. If I had chosen that as my number
Yeah.
2, my defense on that one would be, look, that's probably the defining line for Han Solo. That really defines who he is, gives you an idea who the character is. This one sort of comes in second with that, but at the same time, it's funny, so we just kept that. All right, so now we're gonna go to the
My
number
number one.
ones. Yep, we're gonna go to your number one, then my number one, and look, this is a time that if you guys have a favorite line, go ahead and put that line in the chats. Give us the line, give us who said it, give us the source. If you are also watching on the rebroadcast, go ahead and throw that in the comment section. And then, while you're typing out your comment, you might as well hit that like and subscribe button. All right, so now here we go. Your number one. Once again, Darth Vader. Darth Vader probably is one of the most quotable characters in the Star Wars
Mhm.
franchise, and this is no exception. And this was almost on my list because honestly, this has been one of my favorite lines since I was a kid. Remember, I watched this thing in
Yep.
1977. So,
Yes, this is at the moment where I actually kind of fell in love with Vader. You
mhm.
know, like up until this point, like okay, when he was picking the guy up by with one hand, it's like okay, that was pretty cool. But like this scene right here, when Admiral Mahdi is like popping off to Vader, and he's just giving him a bunch of grief about the Force and his ancient devotion to his devotion to that ancient religion is basically stupid, and he hasn't helped him find the missing data. I mean, he was just really laying
Oh,
into
he
Vader in
was,
front,
man.
mind you, and especially in front of all the like the
Oh,
high
yeah.
ranking
Oh,
officers of
yeah.
the military.
Just going
So it's like
off.
you're really kind of just like going off on Vader, and Vader's is like, look, let me put you in your place real quick. So when he's like, he's trying to tell him the Force isn't real, that's when Vader had him. He was like, oh yeah. So then he starts choking him, and then he delivers like once again, it's like that sarcastic dark humor. Like, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Like Vader was being a total tool or a hole on this one, and I loved it. And of course you have Tarkin looking at him like, okay, this bickering is pointless. Vader, let him go. You made your point. And so then how Vader just kind of calmly afterwards, like, as you wish. meaning I can do this to you at any point, anytime, buddy, and you can't do anything to stop me. And Marty knew that because now he's looking at him afterwards, like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, you just embarrassed me in front of everybody. But it also put all the other admirals and all the other moths in check too. Like, okay, we know not to, he basically was kind of sending a message like, look, don't screw with me.
Well,
And that was that assertion of dominance that I love from Vader. And it was so, he did it with such a kind of a dark swagger that was just really, really cool. And that's why it had to be my number one.
well, yeah. I mean, and again, I could easily put this at number one because for all the reasons you just said, and as soon as I saw it, yeah, this is the first time that you see a little bit of levity in Vader's persona. And there's a lot of things, some of the stuff obviously we found out later, and you can put that in context to the scene now. But even back then, you could more or less tell. For example, we know that after this, like around this time period, Vader obviously was second to the Emperor, but he wasn't really part of the military. And the military had zero respect for him. Like, none. They thought that this guy was just some weirdo in a suit, that had like some weird, he was kind of a remnant of this weird, religion thing or something. I mean, it was just, they had no idea. They had no respect for him because remember, it wasn't until Vader took command in Empire Strikes Back. Okay, now he was the military commander. So now, of course, everybody. And, he was cleaning house. He was choking everybody out left and right. At this point, though, this is why Mahdi had no problems just going off on him and disrespecting him. Because, these guys looked at him like, why are you even here? Who are you anyway? You're just the Emperor's little sidekick, so we have to put up with you. And now, Vader had said the line where, again, remember the first thing, don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer ways, Lord Vader, and then he starts going, your powers haven't really been able to get you anywhere. So what's going on? And then, of course, what's really funny, too, was how he just is listening, and then he just casually strides over to him, and then he chokes him, and that's when he utters the line. And then the other thing to pay attention to in this scene is the fact that Tarkin had zero fear. Like, he's witnessing all this. First of all, he's ordering Vader. And then Vader, of course, complies. And then, he's like, this bickering's pointless, and he goes on. I mean, it's kind of like Tarkin's just like, whatever. So,
well, you know what? It wasn't until you made that point that just something just dawned on me. So, as I was just saying like a moment ago, like, we're watching the power struggle like at this table, right? So you have all these admirals and moths kind of gathered together to talk about, all right, getting rid of the rebellion. And of course, Vader just makes the comments like, don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed, and then of
that
course
could have
that's
been
when
another
Mahdi,
line on the list, too.
oh yeah. And Mahdi goes off on him in a way that I think he was kind of like trying to speak for the collective group.
Yep.
And Vader was kind of like, okay, I'm going to put you in your place and let you know, like, no, this force I'm talking about is real, and I'm going to show you. But then the other part of it was the fact that Tarkin wasn't fazed by any of it because, one, he knows who Vader is. But it also kind of, while Vader was kind of putting all the other Grand Moffs, all the Moffs and Admirals in check, like, don't screw with me either, it also kind of showed that Tarkin was asserting his dominance because he was the only one who could keep Vader in line to say, like, no, let him go.
Yep.
And Vader's like, okay, well, as you wish, and then he continued on with the meeting. And with the fact that Tarkin wasn't fazed by it, I never thought about it until this moment. I was like, wow, there's a whole lot of different power struggles going on at that table.
Like, and again, and this is, I mean, I can't stress this enough. This is one of those things about Star Wars where I always hate it when people just dismiss it as just some
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, you're a fan of that, or whatever. They really don't
Exactly.
understand all the subtleties and all the good ones anyway, the great writing and just a lot of the complexities and everything in each of these scenes. I mean, there's a lot of richness in this stuff. That's why I'm such a fan. I mean, a lot of times people are like, "Yeah, I like Star Wars, but I'm not that, like you're that next level." Of course, I'm looking at some people going, "Yeah, okay, I might be this, but these guys over here, they're at the even crazier level, right?" But this right here is the reason why I'm such a huge Star Wars fan. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that's the
Yeah.
level of course, the problem is that people don't dive that deep into it and don't really see that. But I also think
Yeah.
that that's why, the thing got some Oscars and everything because, it's besides all the technical
Yeah.
awards. I mean,
That's
that
good
was,
writing though.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that was the one that was up for best film, you know?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, interestingly, my number one's also a Darth Vader quote. My Christmas tree ornament. I had a Christmas tree ornament
Yes.
that actually
Love that thing.
that said this and pretty much comes from this. And it's because it's not just what he says, but it's how he delivers the line. You know, Luke basically opens the thing and you hear the breathing, but you don't see him. And then, you
Mm-hmm.
see and there he is with like his lightsaber drawn or whatever. And he's like, the Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet. I mean, it's basically, I mean, I would imitate it, but my throat's been
Yes.
still getting over this flu thing or whatever, so my throat's been bothering me. But if you go back and you watch just the way that he delivers that line, it's to me, it's probably the greatest Vader line delivery. I mean, it's chilling. Especially with the scenery, and everything's kind of all around.
Man,
You got
like
those like glowing steps and yeah.
this whole scene, man, was like when I was a kid and I watched Empire for the first time, and this scene pops up. Like Vader's voice is like booming, almost like you're in a natatorium or something like that, right? It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
ricocheting off the wall, and he already. And this is why when you get the full depth of almost like James Earl Jones, right? So kudos once again to the great James Earl Jones, but yeah, man, just the whole ambiance of this. I mean, you got like this. It's almost like a silhouette of him. You got all the smoke, and he's like the boogeyman. Like he kind of appears out of nowhere because
Mm-hmm.
Luke looked in that direction initially, and he wasn't there. And then you see him, and then he's like right. He's like, "Okay, Batman. Like, when did you get here?" And when he delivers this line, it's like he acknowledges like, "Okay, you got some stuff, but you're not as good as you think you are." And that kind of set the tone for like the rest of their whole confrontation. From then on, it's like, okay, Luke's now trying to be a little bit more snarky back towards him. It's like, well, I'm full of surprises, and you know they're they're kind of jousting at each other back and forth, and the whole time Vader's just testing him and toying with him just to see
Yeah, he wants
how
to see
good
where he
the kid
is.
really is.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
is this guy worthy of the Emperor? Because remember, the Emperor's like, okay. I mean, to paraphrase and put it to everyday language, it's like, look, I mean, if the kid's showing some talent, cool, let's recruit him. If he's not quite there, whatever, he could be a danger, just kill the guy. So Vader, of
Hmm.
course, is toying with him, testing him, trying to find out where the boundaries are, pretty
Hmm.
much like what parameters as far as abilities are we working with here? And that's more or less what Vader was trying to do. Just assess him, pretty much. But what's interesting, and you alluded to this definitely, is that on one hand, he's not as Vader's trying to say, look, you're not as good as you think you are. But what's funny is Luke is also showing, okay, maybe not, but I'm also not as inexperienced as you think I am. You know?
Hmm.
And I find it really fascinating too, because if you really just dissect this line, besides that, it's also trying to put a little bit of fear in him. Like, all right, Force is with you, but you're not a Jedi yet, And it's kind of one of those trying to almost instill in Luke, what have I done? It's like, uh-oh, guy's got a point. He's looking a little imposing. Maybe this is a bad idea. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe
exactly.
Maybe Yoda was right.
Help me.
Right. Yoda trying to say, this isn't a good idea, man. You might want to just let your friends go. You'll get more. I mean, that's too bad. I mean, if he was really watching him in the Force, he could have been like, hey, man, look at Biggs. You thought Biggs was going to be there forever, and now he's not.
And almost cost you an arm and a leg.
Oh.
At least you did your dad.
Well, and that's the other thing that's nice, too, about hindsight, right? Is when you go back and you watch these movies and you're seeing all these great quotes. Obviously, these great quotes are framed within great stories, some better than others, obviously.
Right.
But I think what's interesting about it is that you're getting context. Like, for instance, with that duel, which is, of course, the first one between Luke and Vader, now you're thinking back to the Anakin of, like, say, Episode 3, or perhaps even the Obi-Wan series at this point, or maybe if you even go a little further, the Rebels, Ahsoka, Anakin, Vader duel. Because when you really stop and think about it, it's Anakin inside that suit.
Right.
So when you really watch that duel from that perspective, it adds another emotional layer to it. And then, of course, when you're seeing some of these great lines or whatever, some of them are helped by it. I mean, even some of the lines that Han says about owing Jabba money and stuff like that. Well, when you see the deleted scene where Han was almost like a son to Jabba, now you understand why the betrayal was so bad that he's sending every bounty hunter in the galaxy after him. Because it was a personal thing. It wasn't just like, okay, this guy dropped a shipment. It's like, no, this guy who I looked at as my son is stealing from me. So I think that sometimes the context of watching this other content, which is one of the reasons why I always encourage people, look, I don't expect you to read every book, every comic, watch every movie, television show, all this other stuff. But there are certain key ones, though, that if you do want to glean some enjoyment and some enrichment out of the series, it's a good idea.
Yeah, man, I really love the quotes because they add so much character to the characters. Quite frankly, because they're the quotes that come from these characters really, like you said, when we talked about Han, it really kind of sets you up for who this person really is. You see it in their actions, but then they're also, their words that coincide with that really kind of make it one. And when you see, Han, just in his mannerisms, I don't know, you think a girl like her and a guy like me, and he's just kind of and Luke is like,
no,
just no.
Yeah, too bad it wasn't stay away from my sister. Yeah, I mean, it's really more like I want her for myself, but that's
right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, but we've seen like the range but that allows for growth too, because in those things, like I said, looking at Han, him being a little bit more self-absorbed in A New Hope, to now, okay, in Empire, just another movie a couple of years later, he's all like, yeah, and my friends out there in it. He's like, okay, now Luke is his friend, and he's willing to risk his own life going out there to try to get him out of the, out of the cold. And then now you fast forward to Return of the Jedi when he's on that bridge with Leia, and he's like, oh, but you could tell Luke, is that who you could tell? Like, now you seeing jealousy, and it's like, wait, this is Han Solo. He wasn't like this in the beginning. Vader, we saw the evolution of Vader, from being basically like this cold machine that's kind of just sarcastic and he just kind of has a chip on his shoulder, to now you're seeing, at Return of the Jedi, and he's just kind of like, that name no longer has any meaning for me. Obi-Wan once thought as you do, and he's like, it's too late for me, son. Like, just hearing certain things in his voice and those quotes that you can easily use as your favorite quotes.
Yep.
Based upon context and the growth of these characters throughout the franchise, it's like, wow, that's what I mean. You really get to see the embodiment of the total character because you see their actions, but also you're hearing their words that really help solidify, these characters that are near and dear to us. And that's why we don't like when they screw with them too much, because it's like, no, you're tearing apart all the things that you have built that we fell in love with, and now you're kind of destroying it. So, yeah, man, this was fun.
Yeah, it was, and we're gonna have to do this again. I mean, you got a point, even with Han Solo, right? I mean, it was a slow thing too. A lot of franchises have the tendency to have that turning point for the character. So, taking Han Solo, for example, he would be all self-centered. And then there'd be a turning point. It's like, almost like Kyle from South Park. Yeah, I learned something today, and then, then all of a sudden he's just magically amazing and thoughtful and all this other stuff. But see, when you look at Star Wars, once again, here's that complexity again. Okay, he's like, yeah, this whole mission's suicide, whatever, I'm not doing it. I got my money. I got debts to pay. It's not like I'm just bailing on you. I actually have something that I need to do or I'm going to die. So, but then he turns back and he actually hits the critical shot that then allows Luke to hit his critical shot. Okay, that's number one. Then number two is you go to Empire Strikes Back. Okay, he's getting ready to leave. He's trying to get the Falcon out. You could tell he wants to stay. He's telling the general, like, look, I got, it's bounty not like I'm not coming back, but I got this bounty on my head, man. I got to take care of this. Once I take care of this, I can meet back up with you guys. And honestly, that's what he should have done. I mean, it wouldn't have taken him that long. Let's go drop out the money and then, meet him up wherever. And then they wouldn't have been in the mess they were in. And then, of course, there's a little bit of give and take even throughout Empire. Empire is where you start to see that really tug of war going between what he feels he needs to do and what he wants to do. And, you brought up the Tauntaun scene where he goes out after Luke with no regard for his own safety. So it was a slow burn. And yeah, I mean, by the time we get to Return of the Jedi, he's basically fully, if we want to call it a redemption arc, we can. He's fully redeemed at that point. And the same thing like you brought up with Vader, it's sort of like, okay, now he's in Return of the Jedi when he's alone with Luke. He's talking a little bit more with vulnerability, and he's just quietly, it's like you said, it was a side of him we've never seen before.
Yeah, you could see compassion, or you can see care.
Caring, things that we never thought we would see in Vader. And I mean, I remember in the theater back in 1983 going, I wish this scene were longer. This is the kind of thing I want to see, And here I was 13. Yeah. I wasn't all about the lightsaber battles and space battles and all this stuff. I mean, I liked, even back then, even as a kid, I liked character development, and that's one of the things you get. And when you get good character development, you get good quotes. So absolutely, we're gonna have to do this again, like, more top 5 quotes. I don't know what we'll call it.
We could call it 10 through 6.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go. It's like, okay, right. All right, top 5 favorite quotes, numbers 6 through 10. That'd be awesome. But yeah, let us know what you guys are thinking. If you agree with our quotes, disagree, you still have about 30 seconds in the chat. Chat's actually been quiet today. David had a few things to say, and then it's not like we don't have anybody watching, but I get it. You guys just want to check it out and sit back. It's Friday night. It's very late. Actually, it's Saturday morning now, so I don't blame you. People aren't talkative. But in the comment section, wherever you're watching this, go ahead, drop us your favorite quote. Who said it? Where did it come from? And what you guys think of the quotes that we put in there. Wherever you guys want to do. Either way, if you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Of course, we all know the drill. And see, I'm not even going to annoy you with one of those crazy little graphics that people usually put up around this time, where it shows a graphic of them hitting the like button and subscribe button. You guys are adults. You don't need a graphic. All you need is me telling you to do it. All right, so Monday night, we should be live. We haven't really decided yet what the show is going to be about, right?
Correct.
Okay. It's not going to be one of these where we're going to produce it right now, is it?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Not at this hour.
Not at this hour, yeah. All right, so we still got to think about it. But one thing we don't have to think about is that we will be on Monday night. Should be at 8 o'clock. I know last week was 9 o'clock because work schedules. I always hesitate when whenever I say something like, oh, yeah, we'll for sure be on Monday night at 8. And it's like, oh, no, we're going to be on at 10. So, yeah, just be sure to check us out. We'll be there. Again, if you miss a live broadcast, you can always watch us anytime. All of our shows are there. Check out all the playlists. Check out everything. There's a lot of cool stuff. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.